Dr. Khachadurian, as many of you may have assumed from his name, is Armenian ethnicity, but he was born and grew up in Syria. And then he went on to university and medical school, I guess after actually training as an accountant, changed fields and went to medical school in Beirut in Lebanon, and then stayed there and really initiated his career in Beirut. And it was really there that he made amazing seminal contributions to the field of FH. Now, back in the early 1960s, FH was barely a recognized condition. It had been reported a couple times in the literature, some sort of inherited very high cholesterol. But Dr. Khachadurian really made the first investigations of this concept of FH being an inherited condition, that if you got one gene, you had a certainly high cholesterol, and if you got 2 copies of the gene, you really were extremely high cholesterol. Of course, he didn't know what the gene was at the time. But in 1963, he published a seminal paper in American Journal of Medicine, which I would encourage all of you to go back and take a look at. It's just amazing. In preparation for this, I went back and looked carefully at that paper. And what he did is he took 10 Lebanese families, all of whom had high cholesterol in multiple members of the families, and really painstakingly looked at each of the individuals within these families and noted that in these families, several of which were consanguineous parents or otherwise parts of small villages in Lebanon, noted that some individuals had completely normal cholesterols, some had cholesterols that were clearly high, and then there was a subgroup of the individuals who had cholesterols that were even much higher than that and developed xanthomas that were really impressive coming on in childhood. A picture of elbow xanthomas in one of these patients at 19 years of age, and really made the first observation that, in fact, FH is essentially an autosomal codominant disease where some individuals are clearly affected and then others are much more seriously affected, and really established this concept of FH as not only being inherited, but being inherited through either one allele or both alleles from both parents, this concept of homozygous FH. And in fact, it was fibroblasts from one of his homozygous FH patients that Mike Brown and Joe Goldstein used as a key for their initial work that identified the LDL receptor and led them to their Nobel Prize winning work. So I think that we have to acknowledge that it was this initial observation of Dr. Khachadurian that really launched the field of FH. But he didn't stop there. He eventually immigrated to the U.S. In 1971 as professor of pediatrics and director of the Clinical Research Center at Northwestern University. And then in '73, he was recruited to Rutgers University, where he established the Division of Endocrinology, Metabolism, and Nutrition, and continuing his interest in FH, developed a clinical program there at Rutgers where he saw many patients with FH. And I'd like to pause here to introduce one of his patients, Mishal Anjem. Mishal is a patient who was a longstanding patient of Dr. Khachadurian, and whom I also got to know quite a few years ago and have had great interactions with. And Mishal's going to come to the podium and give some of her reflections of what it was like to be a patient of Dr. Khachadurian. So, Mishal?
Thank you for allowing me the honor of speaking about Dr. Khachadurian. Dr. Khachadurian diagnosed me when I was 7 years old. My parents were immigrants and they didn't have a dime to their name. They were frantic with worry with a child who was always sick, me, and they went from specialist to specialist, and finally they met who they now call their angel, Dr. Khachadurian. They always refer to him as their angel. He finally gave them an answer. It's one thing to know, that you have a problem, that your child is sick, and know what it is. It's another thing to have no idea. So for them, it was heaven sent, that they finally knew what it was, and now they can take steps to figure out what to do. So my father, he worked 3 jobs, and they hardly had any money to support my medical bills, and he would he would give us, those samples that pharmaceutical companies give of the, 3 tablets of Mevacor, and now it's Crestor, but back then he would give us like handfuls upon handfuls of those samples to, for us to take home, because he knew that we couldn't afford it. So we were very blessed to have him come into our lives. So every year he would also ask me to come to UMDNJ and speak in front of medical students to tell them my story. And he was very gracious, and I'm very thankful to him for my life. So thank you so much.
So in 2009, the Avedis and Laura Khachadurian Laboratory for Metabolic Research at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School at Rutgers was established and named in his honor. And the National Lipid Association presented its top award, the Distinguished Achievement Award, to him in 2012. So Avedis, we've known each other for a long time. We had him come to our Philadelphia Lipid and Atherosclerosis Club just a couple years ago to give his take on the history of FH, and then at 88 years, now at 90 years old, Avedis, you just look great and are still going strong. And having you here really underscores the historic nature of this special gathering, where we're making the leap from the theoretical into the practical. And all of your research has created a foundation that is now saving lives and will continue to ensure the diagnosis and treatment for generations of families living with FH. Avedis, personally, I would like to thank you for traveling all the way from your home in New Jersey here to Pasadena. And more importantly, I thank you for leading us all to this amazing moment when we are implementing the vision that you had so many decades ago. Please, if you could come to the podium, Avedis, I'd like to present you with the award. So, Dr. Khachadurian, I'd like to present you with this first annual FH Foundation Award for your many contributions to the field of FH over many decades. And we're so delighted that you could be here tonight. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, this is such an honor that I forgot what I was going to say. I'm overwhelmed, especially after that erudite lecture. I mean, there are so many people that I recognize, but I also forget. I mean, I saw my first patient in 1960. That's exactly, what, 55 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a little child that they brought to the dermatology clinic because she had a lot of xanthomas and xanthelasmas, and then the dermatology people, the father said, no, this is from the blood. So they took her to the hematology clinic, and the hematology professor recognized the disease and brought it. I had just returned from Boston after I had done 2 years of biochemistry training, because at the time medicine was so primitive. You know, there wasn't much knowledge. So I thought, in order to learn something, you had to really do biochemistry. So I did 2 years of enzymology at Harvard and learned about, anyway. So when she came, I took her and took about 3 or 4 weeks in the library to find out what was known about the disease. And there was a lot, and there was some of it was in German, so I had to learn German to find out what they were saying exactly. And then I established all the methods. At the time, we did total cholesterol, cholesterol and free and ester. We did phospholipid phosphorus. That was the good guy in those days. And then we also did the triglycerides. We didn't know how to measure them properly, but it was on the link. Anyway, I established all those things, and then we got the patient. So to make a long story short, once my colleagues found out that I was interested in this, they sent all their patients to me. And the word went around to Iraq, to Egypt, to Palestine. So I would get patients from there. And in a few years, in 10 years, I saw about 100 children with juvenile xanthomatosis. Juvenile. Life expectancy was about 18 years. The treatment at the time was cholestyramine and nicotinic acid. The first thing I did was to find out whether the fibroblasts were making more cholesterol when grown in the medium. And I remember having goose points when I saw how the non-saponifiable esters were having so much counts in them compared to the normal. The normals, when grown in lipid medium, which has lipoproteins in it, were not making any cholesterol. One from this was in 1965. Yes, was so high. I mean, you could, I remember that moment. And anyway, now, you know, I was looking at this, raising awareness, saving lives. And the other important thing is to make people to know how to live with this disease. You know, because I've had so much relationship with these patients coming every day. When I would go in Beirut in the morning, I would see a whole family sitting in the corridors waiting for me to come. Nobody's paying money. You know, you didn't touch money at all. There was nothing. I would examine them, give them the drugs, make their blood tests, give them the samples. We'd get cholestyramine by the barrel, 160 kilo barrel, which smelled very badly. So everybody was complaining in the fund. And then when cholesterol came, it was a little bit, and nicotinic acid. I used to buy reagent crates because I had no money. You see, NIH said that my patients were not type 2 because some of them had high triglycerides. And when we found out that ApoE is also binding to the receptor, Havel, you know, if I don't know if you know him, he was one of the major figures there. He wrote to me, said, how come your patients don't have high triglyceride? So I sent him a review from the NIH of one of my applications. They said, well, because we don't give money outside America, number one. Number two, your patients are not type 2A, and therefore they are not familial hypercholesterolemia. Now we know that ApoE is also the ligand. Anyway, but, you know, I enjoyed working with these people. They were like my family. And when I decided to come to America, they asked me to come to Northwestern because they had a family with high cholesterol. They didn't know what it was. It turned out to be glycogen storage disease. I took the liver biopsy and found out. I mean, there wasn't enough know. And then the secondary hyperlipidemias that one should know about. That I think people don't pay enough attention. One of my worst patients with huge xanthomas all over the body turned out to be autoimmune disease. So there are a lot of secondary forms that people should know. But the other thing is, you know, raising awareness, saving lives, and teach people how to handle. I mean, look at the example here. You know, she's so joyful. I didn't recognize you when I first saw you. She's doing so well and she used to come and not show her xanthomas to the medical students. Anyway, thank you very much. I mean, I don't know what to say, but I'm honored. And thank you for coming. Thank you.